I was 38 years old the week I learned exactly what my mother thought I was worth. For 47 in the afternoon, Mother's Day, her voice flat as a bank statement, I wish you'd never been my daughter. Welcome back to Calm Revenge Tales, the channel where quiet people keep the receipts and family learns that boundaries have a price. If stories about dignity, documents, and consequences are your thing, drop a comment and subscribe. I'm a forensic accountant. I find the money that isn't supposed to be found. Embezzlement, hidden assets in a divorce, a business partner who's been rounding down for a decade. People hire me because they already suspect the truth and they need someone who won't flinch at it. I don't flinch. That's the job. You learn to read a ledger the way other people read a face, for the small inconsistency that gives everything away. I bring this up because for 38 years, I never once ran the numbers on my own family. It didn't occur to me. You don't audit the people who raised you. You just show up. My grandmother Eleanor was the one who taught me to love numbers in the first place. She kept a coffee can of receipts on top of the refrigerator my whole childhood, and some Sundays she'd let me sort them with her at the kitchen table, teaching me that every number tells you a story if you're patient enough to read it. She was 83 now, sharp as a tack, living alone in the house on Birchwood since my grandfather died, and for the last 4 years I was the one who drove her to appointments, who managed her medications, who sat with her on the porch on Tuesday evenings because Tuesday was the day she said the house felt too quiet. My mother, Diane, loved Eleanor the way you love a landmark, from a comfortable distance, mostly on holidays, mostly for photographs. My sister Renata was the favorite, had been since we were girls, and there was a kind of math to our family that nobody wrote down but everyone understood. Renata got the benefit of the doubt. I got the invoice. I don't say that with any heat. I'm stating it the way I'd state a finding in a report. For years, the emotional arithmetic ran like this. I was the responsible one, which meant I absorbed what needed absorbing, and my family experienced that absorption not as a gift, but as a baseline expectation. The way you expect a working faucet to produce water. Nobody thanked the faucet. You'd only notice it if it stopped. I didn't think about stopping. I loved my grandmother. I would have done all of it for free and did for years without resentment, because that's not why I was doing it. I want to be clear about that because what happened next had nothing to do with money and everything to do with the exact moment my mother decided I had none coming. Mother's Day fell on a Sunday that year and I hosted, because I always hosted. My house had the wheelchair ramp I'd installed for Eleanor, the wide bathroom door, the low countertops. I'd spent Saturday cooking a ham my grandmother liked, the kind with the pineapple rings she used to make before her hands got too unsteady for the oven. Renata arrived 40 minutes late with a bakery cake and a bouquet for our mother, nothing for Eleanor, who was, after all, also somebody's mother that day. The trouble started over something almost embarrassingly small. Eleanor mentioned, gently, over dessert, that she wanted to update her healthcare proxy, nothing dramatic, just paperwork she'd been meaning to handle, and she asked if I'd come with her to see her attorney that week. My mother's fork stopped halfway to her mouth. Why her, she said. Not a question. A complaint dressed as a question. Why does she get to go? I said something mild. I said Eleanor could take whoever she wanted, that it wasn't a competition. My mother's face did something I'd seen before but never named, a kind of recalibration, like she was running her own numbers and didn't like the total. She stood up. She said I had always tried to make myself indispensable to this family, that I liked being needed more than I liked being loved, that everyone could see it except me. I said I was sorry she felt that way. I meant it, too, not an apology, but a genuine sorrow that this was the story she'd been telling herself. That's when she said it. For 47 in the afternoon. I know the time because my phone was recording, not intentionally, not maliciously. I'd been trying to capture Eleanor blowing out a candle on a small cake for a photo. And the video just kept running in my apron pocket while everyone talked over each other in the kitchen. I didn't discover the recording until that night. But it's there, time-stamped, unmistakable, my mother's voice cutting clean through the background noise of running water, and my grandmother's soft laugh, Honestly, some days I wish you'd never been my daughter. Nobody in that kitchen said anything for a long moment. Renata looked at her plate. Eleanor looked at me. I did what I do. I didn't cry and I didn't argue. I finished clearing the table. I put the leftover ham in a container and wrote the date on the lid in Sharpie, the way I label everything, the way I've labeled things since I was 9 years old, sorting receipts with my grandmother at that kitchen table. Some habits are just who you are. That night, after everyone had gone, I sat alone at my kitchen island with my phone in front of me, and I watched the video 4 times. Then I saved it to 3 separate places, the way you'd secure any piece of evidence you suspected you might need later, though I told myself at the time it was only so I wouldn't forget the exact words. I wasn't building a case. I was just being careful. That's what I told myself. 3 weeks later, my grandmother's attorney called and asked me to come to his office. Not the family. Me. His name was Harold Weiss, and he had handled Eleanor's affairs for over 20 years. A small, tidy office 2 blocks from the courthouse with a brass nameplate that needed polishing. He set a folder in front of me, and I want you to understand that I have sat across desks like this one for my entire career, watching other people's faces while they learn what a document says about them. It is a different thing to sit on the other side of the desk. It is a different thing entirely. Eleanor had restructured her trust 8 months earlier. Quietly, deliberately, with 2 independent witnesses and a competency evaluation she'd requested herself, anticipating exactly the argument someone might try to make later. The house on Birchwood, its contents, and the bulk of her investment accounts, just over $840,000 in total, were placed in a trust with me named as sole trustee and primary beneficiary. My mother and Renata were named, but only as recipients of $10,000 each, specifically designated, the document said, in recognition of the relationship as it stands. I read the trust 3 times. Not because I didn't understand it. I understand documents like this in my sleep. I read it 3 times because I needed to sit with the fact that my grandmother had watched us, quietly, for years, running her own kind of audit, and had reached a conclusion long before I had. Harold slid a second envelope across the desk. Smaller. My name on the front in Eleanor's handwriting, the same handwriting from decades of birthday cards. Inside was a single page, undated, and signed except for her first name. You were never the help, it read, near the bottom, in the middle of a longer paragraph about porches and Tuesdays and the coffee can of receipts. You were the only one who ever showed up without checking what it would cost her first. I read that line once, and then I folded the letter along its original creases and put it back in the envelope and didn't take it out again for 2 weeks. I wasn't ready. I don't think a person is ever fully ready to be told, in writing, that someone finally saw them clearly. I didn't call my mother. I didn't call Renata. I went home and I read the trust a 3rd time, cover to cover, and I let myself understand it fully before I let myself feel anything about it at all. Within a month, though, word travels in families whether you want it to or not. Harold had to notify all named parties per the trust's terms, so my mother and Renata received their own copies of the relevant summary pages, minus the letter, which was mine alone. My mother's calls started that same week. She didn't mention the trust directly at first. She talked instead about how the Birchwood house should stay in the family properly, about how she'd already been thinking of turning the sun porch into a proper guest suite, about how Renata's daughter would need help with college soon, and that's exactly what your grandmother would have wanted, family taking care of family. She was narrating a future built on an asset she did not have. I let her keep narrating. I asked her once, quietly, what exactly she thought Eleanor would have wanted, and she couldn't answer me, not with anything specific, not with a date or a conversation or a promise Eleanor had actually made. She had the language of entitlement fully loaded and nothing underneath it. Renata came to my house on a Thursday evening, unannounced, and sat at my kitchen island, the same island where I'd watched that video 4 times, and told me she needed me to understand something. She needed the house, or at minimum a fair split of its value, because her marriage was strained and Birchwood was basically already half hers emotionally, and surely I wasn't going to be the reason her daughter didn't go to the college she wanted. I asked her one question. I asked her when the last time was that she had visited Eleanor without me driving her there. She didn't answer that either. She looked at her hands. That night I called Harold. I told him to send the formal notices confirming the trust's terms to both of them, plain language, no ambiguity, effective immediately. If you've ever watched people who couldn't spare one Tuesday evening suddenly find all the time in the world once money entered the conversation, you already know exactly where this story goes. Stick with me. Eleanor passed 11 weeks after that Mother's Day, peacefully, in her sleep, in the house on Birchwood, with me in the guest room down the hall because by then I'd started staying over most nights. The funeral was small, the way she'd wanted it. My mother wore black and cried in a way I'd never seen her cry for anyone living. Renata gave a eulogy about Eleanor's Sunday dinners that I don't believe she had attended more than 4 times in the last decade. 2 weeks after the funeral, my mother organized what she called a family meeting at her house, ostensibly to divide Eleanor's belongings. I knew what it actually was. I accepted the invitation anyway. I brought a folder. I want to be precise about what was in that folder, because precision was the entire point of bringing it. It held a certified copy of the trust. It held the letter, which I had decided, after those 2 weeks of not being ready, I was now ready to read aloud, once, in the room where it belonged. It held a printed transcript of the Mother's Day, recording with the timestamp visible at the corner of every frame. It held 3 months of text messages between my mother and Renata, forwarded to me, accidentally, I believe, by my mother, who has never fully understood her own phone, in which they discussed, in detail, plans for the sun porch renovation, the college fund, and, in one message from Renata I will not forget, the phrase, she'll come around, she always does. The meeting began exactly the way I expected. My mother stood at the head of her dining table, over a spread of Eleanor's jewelry and photo albums laid out like inventory, and delivered what was unmistakably a toast disguised as a memorial, a speech about family and legacy and what Mom would have wanted for all of us, building, sentence by sentence, toward an unspoken verdict that the house was, of course, going to be sold and split, because that was only fair, because we were, after all, a family. When she finished, she looked at me, expecting agreement, or at minimum silence. I asked for the floor. She gave it to me, I think, because she assumed I was about to concede. I opened the folder. I started with the trust, and I read the relevant clause exactly as written, without commentary, because the document doesn't need my opinion to be devastating. I watched my mother's face while I read the figure, $10,000, in recognition of the relationship as it stands, and I watched her understand, in real time, that her own mother had put a specific dollar amount on the distance between them and had chosen the words herself. Then I read the transcript. For 47 in the afternoon. I read her own words back to her in the same flat, even voice she'd used to say them, because that was the only fair way to do it, no dramatization, just the record. The room did what rooms like that always do. Soft confusion first, from Renata, who hadn't known about the recording. Then something closer to hurt from my mother, a kind of wounded surprise, as if the words had somehow escaped her rather than been spoken by her. Then it turned loud, my mother saying I'd been building a case against my own family for months, that this was exactly what she meant about me, that I'd always cared more about being right than being loved. Then, when I didn't raise my voice back, it turned quiet and cold, which is somehow always worse. I answered each escalation with less volume than she gave me, not more. That's the only strategy I've ever needed in a room like that. I told her I hadn't built anything. I'd only kept what already existed. Then I read the letter. One line, the same line, the only line that mattered. You were never the help. You were the only one who ever showed up without checking what it would cost her first. I set the letter on the table, face up, in the middle of all that inventoried jewelry, and I didn't say anything else about it. It didn't need my help. Renata's daughter, Maddie, 17 and mostly silent through the whole afternoon, was the one who finally spoke. She said, quietly, to her mother that she remembered great-grandma Eleanor asking, more than once, where everyone was on Tuesdays. Renata told her to be quiet. Maddie didn't apologize for saying it, and she didn't take it back, but she also didn't say anything more. I noted that. I didn't expect it to fix anything, and it didn't need to. Before I left, my mother asked me, in a smaller voice than I'd heard from her in years, whether I was really going to keep all of it. I told her the house was never really about the house. Eleanor's trust settled exactly as written. The house on Birchwood is mine now, held in a smaller trust one set up myself, the kind with clean numbers and no ambiguity. My mother and Renata each received their $10,000, distributed on schedule, no delays, because I run things properly even when I don't have to be generous about the running. Neither of them has asked me for anything since. Renata's marriage did not survive the year, for reasons that had very little to do with me. My mother and I speak now perhaps 4 times annually, brief and correct, the way you'd speak to a former colleague at a conference, not cold, exactly, just accurate about what remains. Maddie is the one who still comes by, most Tuesday evenings, though nobody arranged that. She just started showing up, and I let her, and some weeks we sort through old boxes from the house together, and she asks me questions about her great-grandmother that nobody else in the family ever thought to ask while Eleanor was alive to answer them. The recording lives on my phone still, backed up in 3 places out of old habit, though I haven't played it again since that afternoon at the dining table. I don't need to. Some evidence only has to be entered into the record once. The letter is framed now in the front hallway of the house on Birchwood, that single line facing anyone who walks through the door. I used part of the trust to convert the sun porch, the one my mother had already mentally renovated for guests who never came, into a respite room for hospice caregivers in the neighborhood, people doing exactly what I used to do on Tuesday evenings, so they'd have somewhere quiet to sit for an hour between shifts. I set up a small fund in Eleanor's name at Maddie's school, earmarked for a student who spends their weekends caring for someone else's parents or grandparents, because that's a kind of labor nobody puts on a transcript, and I thought it deserved one line item. At least in someone's ledger. None of it was revenge. I want to be precise about that word, because precision is the only thing I've ever really had to offer anyone. Revenge would have meant taking something from my mother that was rightfully hers. All I did was stop paying a debt I never actually agreed to carry, the debt of being endlessly, silently useful in exchange for nothing but the privilege of staying in the room. My grandmother was the only one who ever looked at that arrangement and called it what it was. People will tell you that love keeps no record. I've spent my whole career proving that the opposite is usually true, that the truest record of what someone loves is exactly where they choose to put their name, their time, and their money. And that everything else is just a story people tell themselves about who they meant to be. My grandmother kept her record honestly, right up until the end. I only learned a little late to keep mine the same way. If this reminded you that quiet people keep the receipts and that boundaries are allowed even with blood, take that as your sign. Update what needs updating. Tell someone who needs to hear it. Drop a comment, hit subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.